First of all, unusual even in the United States. I'm a native of Washington, D.C. I grew up inside the city line. Other than a few years in my early childhood in Germany, where my father was in the Central Intelligence Agency and stationed in Germany in the 1950s, I spent my entire youth in Washington, D.C. I went to Princeton University as an undergraduate, studied economics with some additional emphasis on applied mathematics back in the days when that meant learning how to write programs in Fortran. And then went out west to Stanford Business School. For a couple of years after graduation, I worked as a consultant and then concluded I just wanted to be near where things were actually happening instead of writing studies about what might be happening. And I joined a company called Tandem Computers, which was one of the early hot stories. In fact, Tandem Computers was the first successful investment that a venture company called Kleiner Perkins, Caulfield and Byers, that it was Kleiner Perkins's first investment success in the 70s and 80s. And I had a series of finance jobs. I started in the Treasury, which is a good place for people who don't have necessarily much accounting experience. To go into the Treasury, especially on the West Coast, one of the principal skills is being able to get up early enough to do the investing because the markets open at 6 o'clock on the West Coast, well, 6:30. But I worked at Tandem Computers for 7 years. And then for the next 3 years, in the late 80s, I was the corporate controller at Oracle, right after it had gone public, and grew in those 3 years, from $50 to $500 million. And that was a remarkable experience. I think anybody who worked for Larry Ellison will say that their experience was a remarkable experience. I found it very interesting and very enjoyable. But the main takeaway for me from having worked at Oracle was that at Oracle, I was the alpha user of Oracle Financials, which was the first financial accounting system based on a relational database. And that was a profound change in the way the financial information was recorded. And among other things, it was a profound change in the way you could get information out of an accounting system. After my time at Oracle, and since then, I've been a CFO for now nearly 30 years, and at a variety of companies. One of them that you mentioned, the growth, was Broadvision. I joined Broadvision when it was 24 employees and no revenues, and was there for 6 years until the time it had about 3,600 employees and over $500 million in annual revenue. We took that company public and had several stock offerings after that. Since then, I've been the CFO of several other software companies. And as Dinis, as you mentioned earlier, a few years ago, one of the passions, and perhaps you can infer that from my description of my experience at Oracle, one of my passions is not just looking at the numbers, but presenting the numbers in a way that people actually can understand them. And I view it fundamentally as a communication skill. And that's what motivated me to write Painting with Numbers. And so over the last 6 or 8 years, I've been a CFO, mostly on a contract basis. I'm involved in an interesting startup I'll talk about in just a second. But I've been involved as a CFO, as I said, mostly on a contract basis, and also involved in specific CFO type projects. Another interest of mine is designing incentive compensation plans that actually make sense, that don't create fratricidal incentives within a company, and so on. But also, as a result of having published the book, I've done a fair amount of writing and speaking and teaching. As you mentioned, I teach a class at Berkeley called Presenting Quantitative Data Effectively. I've also taught a course like that for a few years at the University of Coburg in the MBA program in Germany. So that brings us up to the present. I'm currently involved in a startup. It's very, very early. In another medical issue that's gotten a lot of, involved in another medical issue that's gotten a lot of press lately, a little bit less during the pandemic, but it's the opioid crisis. And it's a software company whose goal is to make life easier and more efficient for doctors who prescribe controlled substances. And if you like, we can spend a little bit of time talking about that in the course of this conversation. Again, one of the things it relates to is is producing information for people who have to make a living making intelligent decisions about the information they're getting.